Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it was your wife, because your wife is a fan of me shutting the fuck up.
In all fairness, I think most people are.
Yeah, touche. I kind of walked into that one. Welcome, nerds, to episode 203 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Twitter and Instagram are both at The Nerds Podcast. You can check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com, which is kind of the hub for all of the Nerds You're Looking For content, including our YouTube page, which you can, of course, find on YouTube, The Nerds You're Looking For. It also has our Letterboxd. You can follow me on Letterboxd at The Nerds Podcast, my co-host at That Tyler Hunt. And, of course, I am joined by my co-host, as always, That Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am doing pretty well, man. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm a little under the weather. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice or not. I woke up this morning with pretty bad, sore throat, and of course you can make your jokes if you'd like. And then just kind of like a little bit of a head cold. It's not too bad, so I'm going to try to push through. It's kind of been a wild week, actually. So I was really super busy at work this week, surprisingly busy. I mean, summer is usually our busier time, just the way that the stuff that we make at the job that I do. So it's usually typically a busier time, but this week was just kind of a lot of weird shit happened. And then I got us blocked on Twitter for no reason. So that was kind of funny. And then, of course, I'm sick now. So it's kind of been a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah, you sent me a screenshot of us being blocked by that one user on Twitter, and I don't want to talk too much about one crazy person, but I did stalk. I'm assuming it's a her with my personal Twitter account just to see what the conversation looked like, and you didn't do anything too terrible. It's not like you called her a bitch or something. You didn't call her name. You didn't you just were stating your opinion, and you did so respectfully. But I don't know if you looked at her Twitter account very thoroughly before she ended up blocking us, but she is a crazy person. She's one of, whenever we reviewed Infinity War, I think it was, I made the comment about how some of these Marvel movies are kind of collecting a fan base that reminded me of Twilight. These rabid teenage girls that just find the actors attractive. And she's one of those. Her account is basically there was one tweet that was how blessed we are to walk on the same earth as Chris Evans and that kind of crazy shit. So again, I don't want to give too much attention to a crazy person, but it's the exact person I was talking about whenever we reviewed that movie.
Yeah, I thought that too. So I'll give a brief overview of what happened. So basically, I don't know if this is part of Nerd News or not this week, but they dropped a new trailer for Iron Fist Season 2, and I didn't actually watch the trailer, so if that was part of Nerd News, don't expect me to say I watched it. But I did see a couple of screenshots, and we talked about this with Luke Cage Season 2, where he's so bad at martial arts. Finn Jones is just not good at it. Even judging by actor standards, I feel like he's not very good at it. So I was like, well, you need to put him in the mask for two reasons, really, because, it would be closer to the comic books, which is always the best way to go. And second, you can get a stunt double in there that knows martial arts. And that's all I said was, oh, I'm glad that they're going to put him in a mask so they can get somebody in there that's actually good at martial arts. And I had a couple of people say something to me, and we had a legitimate, reasonable conversation about it. And then I had this person who I'm going to refer to as a she and a her because, like you said, it feels like it is a woman. And she quoted me and was like, I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was a complete overreaction to what I said. It was something to the effect I wish there was a mask around your mouth. Just do us a favor and not watch season 2. And I thought that was hilarious because I thought isn't this like, is this your first day on Twitter? Because this is what Twitter's for. It's for people to bitch about stupid stuff that they don't like. Like, that's the reason Twitter exists. And so it kind of went back and forth a couple of times, but I didn't, like you said, I didn't feel like I was being mean to her. Like, I was just saying my opinion, and I feel like I was fairly rational. Like, I was building up to being an asshole. Like, it was going to happen. So my favorite reply didn't get to actually reply to it because she had already blocked us. But she said the last one that I saw from her said, my opinion is that you should shut the fuck up and not watch season 2. And my reply that I didn't actually get to post because she was a punk bitch and blocked us was, don't worry, I'm going to watch it, and I'm going to make sure I @ you on every tweet for my play-by-play of every episode I watch. And I was for sure going to do that. Like, I feel like people underestimate my pettiness. Like, I was going to for sure do that. And I figured that reply right there was going to get me blocked. But then if it didn't, I was going to for sure do that. And I guarantee you that would have gotten me blocked. So the end goal was the same. But I was surprised how quickly she pulled the trigger on that, just because you're the one that started the shit. Like, if you can't handle a simple, like, disagreement conversation, because like I said, I don't feel like I was being an asshole at any point, then why do that? Like, why quote somebody if you can't handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on her Twitter right now, and I hate that we're giving somebody like this so much attention, but like a couple examples of how she tweets. A comprehensive list of things Chris Evans doesn't have. Number 1, flaws. The end. So that's the kind of person you're dealing with here. And judging by how much she's crushing on Chris Evans and obsessed, it might be my wife's Twitter. I'm not 100% sure. But it's kind of crazy. I guess that's what you get whenever you're on social media. So
yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it was your wife, because your wife is a fan of me shutting the fuck up.
In all fairness, I think most people are.
Yeah, touche. I kind of walked into that one. So if this is your first episode, we break up the episodes into segments. In our first segment, we just kind of like checking in with each other. We call it What We're Into. So what are you into this week?
So I've brought up on the podcast before about how every Monday night I play video games with my bros from high school, and it's definitely one of the highlights of my week in addition to recording the podcast. And I love that me and my friends that I've been friends with for so long are able to stay in touch like this, even though we're all spread out throughout the US and in different time zones. We had been playing Fortnite most of the year, but had also cycled through Overwatch again and a few other older games that we hadn't played in a while. Recently, though, we turned to PC gaming and Steam. So I mentioned Steam and playing Elder Scrolls Online on my Mac a few episodes ago, and talked about how I wasn't a big computer gamer and that I prefer console to playing games on my Mac, and that stands true. However, Steam has a game, I don't know if you'd call it a game or maybe you'd call it a program called Tabletop that allows you to play board games on your Mac or PC with others. So that's kind of what we've been doing the last few weeks. The mechanics of playing a board game, though, on your computer is a little weird, especially since I don't have a mouse and I use the mouse pad on my Mac to play. So to get things down, we did have a Monday night where we just played Uno a couple times just to get a firm grasp on how you would actually deal cards and do those types of things on the software. But after that, we jumped into a new game, which is what I'm going to talk about this week. It's called Gloomhaven, and it is a massive board game. You're nodding your head like you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've heard like glowing reviews. I've never played it myself, mostly because it's like, even on sale, it's like $130 on Amazon. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, man. Out of curiosity, I looked up what the physical copy of this game would cost, and on Amazon right now, it's $140. So it's insane. The cool thing about Tabletop, though, is that we're able to play this game for free. And I believe it's because we all bought the Tabletop software, which is like $20. But I mean, the physical I don't know if Mike, my buddy Mike, bought the game and that's why we're able to play. I would doubt that he shelled out $140 for an online version of the game. So I think it's just part of the Tabletop program, but I could be wrong. Either way, we're playing this game for free. in my eyes. So that's been pretty cool, because if we were all together, like $140 is like you said, a lot for a game. So anyways, about the game itself. So Gloomhaven is co-op. It's meant for 1 to 4 players. We're currently playing with 4 in our quest. It's a fantasy dungeon crawl game, and the goal is to win combat scenarios. And like I mentioned, it is massive. So I pulled a couple facts from Wikipedia here. So there are 95 unique scenarios that you can play in this game, and there are more than 1,500 cards in the box if you buy the physical copy, and the physical copy of the game is over 20 pounds. So to put like the scenarios that are part of this board game in perspective, we played one scenario last Monday night, and it took us over 4 hours. So 4 hours, I'm assuming that's not the norm. I think the norm is like 1 to 2, but it took us 4 hours for this one, and there's 95 of them. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of gameplay you can do. As far as the characters you play as, there are 17 classes that you can choose from. I'm currently playing as a character named Spellweaver. So she's a magic-based character, as you can probably guess by her name, but she doesn't have much health, so I typically hang back and stand behind the tank players and do long-range attacks, all of that good stuff. So one of the cool things about the game that really contributes to how massive it is that it's also a legacy game. And I had to look up what that means, but it basically means that the game changes permanently as you play through each session. So you, like if you had the physical copy of the board, you would put down stickers and things on the board. So it changes as you play. The way that my buddy Mike kind of sold it to us to play was by comparing it to Dungeons and Dragons. So D&D has been something that I've wanted to try for a long time, and I guarantee that my friends and I would have been the guys in high school that played that game had Halo 2 not sucked us in first, but yeah, that's kind of what looped me into it, because I've always been intrigued in those types of things. So it's hard to dive too much more into this because we've only really started playing and I've only been through a couple scenarios, but so far it is a lot of fun, and it's definitely the nerdiest thing I've played in a while, which I wear as a badge of honor for sure, obviously doing this podcast. So I definitely wanted to bring it up because I had never heard of it, and it's intense, but in a good way. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring this up because I have considered pulling the trigger on Gloomhaven, like when I find it on sale or whatever, because I follow the IGN daily deals and stuff like that, and so they're always talking about this game and when it's on sale, because it's such a massive endeavor to play. But I'm pretty sure my wife would murder me, like straight up murder me. It's funny that you bring it up though, because I recently, and I tweeted this out, so you may have already seen it, but I recently backed my first Kickstarter ever.
Oh yeah,
which was a drag door Homestar Runner board game, like a cooperative board game, and it looks really, really fun. And I was a big Homestar Runner guy in high school. I haven't watched it in a long, long time. I doubt that it holds up, but it looked really fun, and it's a cooperative game that my wife and I can play together. That's kind of, since you moved away, that's kind of, and this is going to sound sad, it's kind of like the games that I have to consider. Like if it's a cooperative game that we can play, my wife and I can play together, that's kind of the only games I can get at this point, because I don't really have board game buddies anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same boat I'm in. Like, and as much fun as it is playing with my buddies online, and it's nice doing it that way because there's not a bunch of things that you have to organize with the game. I think Gloomhaven is a game where it would be really cool if you just had it set up in a room and your buddies come over and you have all of your stuff out, like from the last time, and you just keep picking up every time. Kind of similar to Dungeons and Dragons. So I do wish that I had the option to do that, but I don't have any board game buddies up here either. A couple of my wife's coworkers came over for a game night a few weeks ago, and I wouldn't tell her this, but it just wasn't the same, obviously. So it was more of a Cards Against Humanity game night as opposed to games that we like to play. So I do miss all of that for sure, but I'm in the same boat. Like, you know, my wife and I play Pandemic because not only am I limited to like 1 to 2 player games, but it has to be a co-op because Brittany is a sore loser for sure. So anyways, man, that's a lot about my board game. So what are you into this week?
I watched Mile 22, which is a new Peter Berg movie, who did Patriots Day and Lone Survivor. Basically, he has never read a script that he didn't think Mark Wahlberg could star in. It's so weird that out of everyone that you could like pick as your muse, Mark Wahlberg is the guy that you pick. So if you're sitting there listening to this, which obviously you are, I don't know why I said that, but if you're thinking, why did I go see this? I was kind of thinking the same thing as I was sitting in the theater waiting for this movie to start. And I think I said something when I checked in on Facebook to the extent of, now that I have A-list, my threshold for seeing movies, which was already pretty low, is almost non-existent at this point. Like, my goal is now to see like 2 or 3 movies a week, and I've actually gotten to the point even early into this having a list where I will look at the showtimes and there will be nothing that I haven't seen before. And as a movie nerd, that's a pretty cool feeling, is to look at all the showtimes and know that you can't go see something because you've seen everything that they're showing. So that's pretty cool. So if you're not aware, Mile 22, like I said, stars Mark Wahlberg because Peter Berg is legally obligated to put him in every movie that he does. And he stars as James Silva, who is the leader of an elite squad of soldiers who must escort a high priority prisoner out of his country before his own government captures and kills him. So I had 0 expectations for this, as I do for all Marky Mark's movies. I have 0 expectations going in because he's not a very good actor. So I have to admit, given those almost non-existent expectations, I didn't think this movie was awful. Like, I heard some really bad stuff going into it, and I didn't think it was awful. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I don't particularly like some of the story choices that Peter Berg, I've seen a few of his movies, and I don't particularly like a lot of the story choices that he makes. I don't think that he's the best storyteller, but he definitely is one of those guys that knows how to move a camera and definitely knows the technical aspects of being a director. And I was I wouldn't say necessarily blown away by some of these scenes in this movie. I will say that there is a scene, it's about halfway through the movie, where there's kind of like an interrogation scene turns into a massive fight scene. And I had heard some really cool things about the Mission Impossible Fallout bathroom scene. And ultimately, I was somewhat disappointed in that because I was told, like, I went into this, like, I said when we reviewed it, as like the Dark Knight of Mission Impossible movies. And I was told that bathroom scene had a lot to do with it, and I was ultimately disappointed because it didn't live up to that expectation. I thought that this interrogation scene / fight scene was far and away better than that scene in Mission Impossible. Now, Mission Impossible was a far and away better movie than this ultimately, but I thought that scene was a lot cooler, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I did that bathroom scene. There is a scene at the very beginning, and some of this movie kind of falls into that, like, really frequent hard cut action scenes that you would like see in Transformers. Like, it's kind of chaotic and hard to follow. And there's a scene at the very beginning where it's very, very prevalent, where the elite squad it's led by Mark Wahlberg, they take this house that is that's housing these Russian spies, and it's super like jump cutty, and it's very distracting. And a lot of times when I see stuff like that, I try to give the director, especially when it's a well-known director like Berg, like I try to give him the benefit of the doubt, saying, well, it's kind of a chaotic scene, maybe that's what they're trying to create that atmosphere for the viewer. But in this particular scene, it wasn't that chaotic. Like, they're showing you how good this elite squad is at their job, and it's kind of setting the tone for the rest of the movie. Now, it wouldn't be much of a movie if this scene towards the end of it didn't turn to shit. That definitely happens, and that scene sets the tone for the rest of the movie. But when it was super jump cutty and the cuts came really frequently and it was very chaotic, like they were being badass and they were being awesome and they were like this elite squad, and I just didn't feel the need for that. So it was kind of hard for me to give him the benefit of the doubt. I just felt like he kind of went into that same like cliche rut of Transformers of just doing those really hard cuts, and it was very distracting. But the action was the best part of this movie. Mostly because, first of all, I don't think Marky Mark is a very good actor, like I said. And also, they just try to give him like weird character development in this movie. Like they make him kind of like the accountant in that Ben Affleck movie that we reviewed. Like he's kind of like borderline autistic. And they have like this thing that they do where he has like this rubber band on his wrist, and he's supposed to, they plant it early in the movie that he like snaps it when he, like his brain is racing and he's trying to slow it down. But honestly, it was super, super distracting. That's all it was super distracting. And honestly, like, surprisingly, because I didn't think I would ever get into this movie, like there was moments where I was kind of getting into this movie, and then they would do that stupid rubber band thing, and I don't mean for the pun is definitely not intended, but it would literally snap me back. Oh yeah, I'm watching a stupid Mark Wahlberg movie. Like that's literally anytime I ever got into this movie, which didn't happen very often, they would literally snap me back, literally and figuratively snap me back into reality. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm watching this stupid Mark Wahlberg movie. So all in all, I was somewhat impressed with this movie. Definitely more impressed than I thought I was going to be, just because, like I said, I had zero expectations going in. I would probably, if I had to give it a star rating, I'd probably give it a 2.5 stars. It's not something that I would definitely, unless you have A-list, I wouldn't seek out to go see in theaters. I definitely wouldn't pay money to see this movie, and I wouldn't have paid money if I didn't have A-list. But if it's something that you just kind of late at night looking for a movie, I fall asleep a lot of times to movies like late at night. This is definitely one of those movies where you can shut your brain off and just kind of drift off to sleep, because the story is not great.
Yeah, I mean, this is a movie, you said it, like if I had A-list, or if I had a version of MoviePass that worked, I'd go see it just to see it, but I'm not going to seek this movie out on my own, so I'm sure I'll see it like whenever they put it on Netflix someday.
For sure. Just for the action, I think it's a worthy watch.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two a week. And the last 2 weeks, because we didn't text each other and call dibs, we had to talk about the same comic. Well, hopefully we're breaking that streak, because I did text Tyler and call dibs on the comic that I'm going to talk about. So what did you read this week?
I read The Pearl #1.
You son of a bitch. I know you're just kidding.
No, I hate to talk about this comic again, but obviously I don't hate it enough to not talk about it. So I'm going to talk about Batman. More specifically, Batman 53. And the reason that I wanted to bring it up was because this issue did generate some conversation this week. So I figured it would be appropriate to bring it up. I did talk about Batman 50 about a month and a half ago, but I did want to also follow up because Batman 53 wraps up the short story arc that followed Batman 50 and the Batman and Catwoman marriage story. Have you read Batman 50 yet?
No, I haven't gotten to it yet.
All right, well, I'm going to spoil it. So if you're not caught up, that's on you. So I apologize. But this 3-issue arc very much felt like 12 Angry Men. It's a situation where Bruce Wayne is basically trying to save Mr. Freeze from the actions of Batman by putting himself on a jury for the villain. So I did have a note here where I would say some things about Batman 50 and what happened in Batman 50, but I am going to leave it out for you, Pat, because I don't want to spoil it for you since you haven't got there yet. But obviously, there was some aggression that happened between Batman and Mr. Freeze that Bruce was not okay with after really thinking about it. So he, like I said, inserts himself into this jury and wants to basically change the mind of 11 other jurors. So again, like after the Batman attack, Bruce takes a step back and realizes that he has to be a better person as Batman. And the apprehension was just, again, too violent for him. So these 3 issues almost solely followed the jury's deliberation. So it's very much a courtroom procedural. Because of the faith that the citizens of Gotham have in Batman, they all agree pretty much immediately that Mr. Freeze is guilty. So it's going to take Bruce Wayne to convince them all otherwise. So over these 3 issues, there's a lot of great dialogue, and Bruce Wayne is essentially opening himself up to strangers in ways that we don't typically see him do, because he's a very obviously secluded person. And when you think of Batman, you don't think of somebody like sharing their feelings. So that was definitely new for the character. The things that this arc did phenomenally were showing off how Bruce dealt with all the pain and grief that he had gone through in recent issues, without being too on the nose about it. At first, I thought it was weird that the first story arc out of the wedding issue was going to be a Mr. Freeze story, but it does make a lot of sense now that is wrapped up. Batman even makes like a tough decision around his Batman costume at the end of 53 that sounds a little corny, but it kind of just shows how human the character really is. It's all really great stuff, but unfortunately, the biggest takeaway for everyone in this issue was that Bruce Wayne alludes to being an atheist. While he's trying to get his point across to the jurors, and like I said, he's kind of talking about the faith that the citizens of Gotham have in Batman and compare it to the faith that Job has in God in the Bible. And one of the jurors point blank asks Bruce if he believes in God, and he says that he used to. And that's pretty much the end of it. But that one line of dialogue has resulted in all of this conversation online. I saw that you retweeted something that Scott Snyder had said about it on our Twitter. So I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not a religious person, but really, who cares? Like, when you stop and think about the pain that Bruce Wayne has been through in his life, like losing his parents and all of the things that have drove him to be Batman and all the things that he's experienced as Batman, it kind of makes sense that he wouldn't believe in a higher power. But again, this is all that people are talking about at this point. So, I mean, I don't want to keep going because there's no point in getting too incredibly religious on the podcast, but I would encourage everyone to see through that white noise and give this arc a shot, because it's great and very similar to other things that Tom King has done in his 53 issue run. It doesn't feel like stuff that we've seen with the Batman character before. So needless to say, I liked it a lot.
At this point, and this is a conversation we could save for like a separate episode because it would take so long talking about it. So I'll try to be as brief as possible, but it seems like because there's a 24 hours news cycle, it's like anything that they can write about, they're going to write about. And this just seems like if it's as short and like not important to the issue as you kind of make it out to be, why would I wouldn't even blink like while I was reading it. Like, that didn't seem like it makes sense to the character. That's the thing. Like, it shouldn't surprise anybody. And maybe it's just because I'm not religious and I haven't been for a pretty long time that I just don't think in that way anymore. So the fact that Batman doesn't believe in God doesn't really bother me that much, because first of all, like I said, it makes sense with the character. And second of all, I don't. So it's like, it wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah, man. We're on the same page for sure. It's just it's not even like the biggest thing to come out of that comic, in my opinion. And it's dumb that that's what we're talking about, but it is what it is. You're right. It's that 24-hour news cycle. So all that being said, I know what you read, but what did you read?
Yeah, like Tyler alluded to, I read Pearl #1, which is written by Michael Bendis. I don't know why I struggled to say his name. And then the art is done by Michael Gaydos, which I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but I apologize if it is, because you probably got bullied a lot as a kid. But if you know this name or these names, it's because, well, I mean, we talk about Brian Michael Bendis a lot on the podcast, it seems. He's a big name. He's kind of a superstar in the comic world, but also because they actually created Jessica Jones together. And I know a lot of people are comparing this book to Jessica Jones because it is a very strong female character and blah, blah, blah. Like, I tried to get that out of my head while I was reading this book because I feel like that's just lazy analysis. But anyways, this comic is put out by Jinx World, which, if you're not aware, it's kind of Bendis's own line of comics. It's kind of like Millar World or Miller World or whatever you want to call it. We've talked about that before. It's kind of the same thing. So Jinx World is Bendis's kind of comic line, and Pearl is about a tattoo artist who turns assassin for the Yakuza. And like I said, it's pretty easy to compare this to Jessica Jones because they created it together and now they're back for Pearl. And for me, like I said, I try to stay away from that because I honestly, other than being a strong female character, and she's not a private eye, like she's a tattoo artist. So it's not like they have that in common. I mean, they're badass and they're female, and that's about it. As far as the first issue, I don't know if she's going to become more of that type of character in the second or third or future issues. But right now, it's kind of hard for me to really compare her to Jessica Jones because I just haven't seen enough. And this story, there's not a whole lot to it. In the first issue, it's kind of hard to talk about the story because it's kind of just introducing you to her and to her kind of line of work and the people that she has to deal with. There's a pretty cool scene at the very beginning that I liked quite a lot, but I think the thing that captured my attention the most is, like I said, Pearl is a tattoo artist, and the tattoos, I have several tattoos. I'm definitely a fan of tattoos, and they actually have a tattoo designer for this book. So it's not the artist that does the tattoos. It's actually a guy named Diego Martin, which I thought was really kind of a cool touch to this book, that you have somebody that actually does tattoos for a living coming in and designing the tattoos. And it's really, really cool. Some of the tattoo designs on these characters are really cool, and I'm excited to see where this book goes. Like I said, there's not a whole lot else to talk about because there's not a ton of story that gets introduced. It's just kind of giving you an intro to the character and kind of giving you an intro to this world that the character lives in. But I'm definitely excited, especially if the tattoos continue to be a big part of the book, because they're really fantastic to look at, and I am a huge fan of tattoos.
That's awesome, man. I like a lot, like you said, that they got a tattoo artist to actually design it. It almost sounds a little bit like, I don't know, like it's a gimmick, but if the story's good, like that's a cool touch.
Yeah, I didn't get that impression this is just the first issue, so obviously we'll see in future issues, but it did just enough. And because Bendis is such a big name, he's definitely one of those guys that you kind of give the benefit of the doubt. Even though I'm not a huge fan, you do kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. So I'm willing to give him another issue to see where this story goes. But I'll be real honest with you, and I might sound like a hypocrite. If it was anybody else, I probably would have said, no, I'm not going to read another issue of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that says a lot about the leash that we give writers that we like. For example, we've both gone on record about how much we like Scott Snyder, and he did a book a couple years ago called After Death AD, and I think I talked pretty glowingly of that first issue, and I got like halfway through the second issue, and I was like, I just can't do this. And I think I was trying to force myself to like it because of the person who wrote it. Same thing with like his current Justice League run. Like I stopped picking that up because I just didn't like it. So I think I went on longer than I would have if it was another writer, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Cool, man. Ready for nerd news?
Yeah. What do you got this week?
Okay, cool. Nothing of any substantial weight, but a few different things that I did want to talk about. So did you see all of the conversation and drama around this ad for The Nun on YouTube? I
did. Like I said, we do the YouTube channel, so, and that's, I say we, it's almost all me. It's like 99.9% me. So yeah, I do frequent YouTube a lot. I didn't actually see the ad myself. I kind of wish I did though, because it's kind of a cool idea. Like I kind of like it. I think it's awesome, but obviously the people that watch YouTube are mainly little kids.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't know the story, there was a short ad for the movie The Nun that comes out in a few weeks that played before videos, very similar to all ads. And it was made to look like your volume was getting turned down. And obviously the person watching the video would be like, what's going on? And probably try to turn their volume up. And then there was just a jump scare where the nun's face is there, and it was just an advertisement for the movie, and people were not happy about it. And like you, the ad did not get me. Like, I never saw it, but I don't know. I'm back and forth on it. Like, we talk about how much we dislike jump scares in horror movies and think that they're cheap. So that doesn't do me a lot of, it doesn't get me too pumped for this movie if that's all of what the movie's going to be is jump scares. Like, I don't know if you've seen the trailer for it, but the trailer is essentially hinges on this one jump scare. So I'm assuming that's how the movie's going to be. But either way, like, not everybody's into that. And if you're an unsuspecting YouTube viewer, like, that could piss me off. So I get it.
Yeah, and I think most people are upset the fact that it made it look like their volume was down, and it kind of tricked them to turn their volume up and stuff like that. But there's actually, just FYI, there's a way to limit the ads that you see, like the type of ads that you see. So maybe just know how to do your YouTube settings, and you don't be a punk bitch.
There you go. From the master himself. Okay, this next story is about a movie that came out a long time ago at this point, about Inception. So Michael Caine was doing a intro to the movie, I guess, recently, and he made the comment that when he read the script, he was very confused as to what was a dream and what was reality. And the way that Christopher Nolan told him to think about it was, if you're in a scene, it is real. Like, he pretty much simplified it for him down to that science. And why that's important is because he is in the final scene that is left to be ambiguous. Whether Leonardo DiCaprio's character is dreaming or if it's reality whenever he's reunited with his kids in America and he's allowed to come back into the country. So Michael Caine being in that scene should mean that it's not so ambiguous that it is real life, which is the opinion I've had for a long time. Like, there's a theory on the internet that the totem is not the top, that Leonardo DiCaprio's character's totem is his wedding ring, and he only has his wedding ring on in reality, and he has it on in that scene, or vice versa, one or the other. So I've always thought that kind of answered that scene was real, but Michael Caine's just putting it out there, man.
Yeah, I kind of like the fact that we can finally put this to bed, because honestly, that movie is amazing visually, and I can get why people get into it so much. I've never really got into the argument about whether or not that he's still in the dream world or is it real. Like, that didn't really, it bothers me when they make it ambiguous at the end. Like, I've talked about this before, like Prisoners felt the same way. Like, I can't get into that movie as much as I wanted to, just because they leave that ending very ambiguous. And I thought we were going to see a lot of trends in filmmaking after Inception, that we were going to have a lot of those really ambiguous endings. That we've had a few, but not as much as I was afraid that we were going to get, because I've said this before, like, I like to be able to interpret things, but at the same time, it's like, this is your story. Tell us your story. Don't leave us like on this cliffhanger and have us interpret it. I get why they do it like that, but at the same time, like, I'm not watching to hear somebody else's theory on something. I'm watching it to see a Christopher Nolan movie. And so that's always kind of bugged me when it's left on such an ambiguous ending. Like, I like to be able to interpret things. I've said this before, like, I don't want the filmmaker to hold my hand because I'm a fairly intelligent person. I can figure stuff out without you just blatantly telling me. I don't want that by any means, but I think there's definitely a line between that and the ambiguous ending that you get in Inception and in Prisoners.
Yeah. And there was an interview with Christopher Nolan a few years ago where he said that it's meant to be ambiguous to show that differing levels of reality still matter or still hold emotional weight or something like that, which is kind of a cop-out but kind of makes sense with what he was trying to do. But who knows, man. Good movie, though. I need to revisit it. I haven't watched it in a couple years. Let's see. So Jason Blumhouse did a Q&A on Twitter this week, and it was kind of entertaining. Like, if you go back and read some of he's very transparent with his answers. Like, a lot of times when people do these Q&As, they're like, I don't know, maybe, but he's very much like yes, no, whatever to like these questions that people are asking him about, like sequels and the movies that Blumhouse has put out. And somebody asked him if there's a chance that Blumhouse is going to get other franchises, and he said yes, a very good possibility. obviously they're putting out the Halloween movie, and they did Split, and they've done some stuff with established franchises. And then in another question, somebody asked if he could fix the Dark Universe movies that Universal was doing, and he said, yes, absolutely, I'd love to get my hands on those, or something along those lines. So, you know, like I said, the story doesn't carry a ton of weight because it's just all speculation. But my question to you would be, do you think that the Dark Universe would have a better chance of working if Jason Blum is involved?
Yes, I do think that would probably be the best case scenario. Do I think it would work in general? I mean, I'd love to see it work. I think it's a really cool idea. I don't think it would work just for the fact that I don't know if they're big enough names to sell enough tickets to justify a big movie universe. Like Marvel obviously can do it because they have all these really like uber popular characters, and DC can kind of do it because they also have these super popular characters, but not everything can hold its own movie universe just because you have to make enough money to justify the other movies, and you have to do well enough to do so. And I don't know if the Universal monsters really have that weight anymore. Like, I mean, 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe, but nowadays we see cooler shit on YouTube than we do in some of these movies, the Universal monsters and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think that would be the best case scenario. I don't know if it would kind of fit the way that they make movies, though. Like, I mean, because they're kind of like indie horror type of movies, like low budget, not like super low budget, but they've definitely kind of expanded with Split and others, especially with Halloween. So I don't know if they're going to be like tiny budget anymore, but these movies obviously need a lot of CG and stuff like that. So I don't know if it would definitely fit their blueprint for movies that they usually do.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because somebody asked him if he'd make a horror movie for over $100 million, and he said absolutely not, because then it wouldn't be scary. So that, I mean, he's definitely on the same page with you there, but I think you're right. I think at this point, it's like, we don't need your Universal monsters, Grandpa. We have the Nun and Slender Man, so you can keep those
exactly.
to yourself. Yeah. Then the last story I had was that the Watchmen series that Damon Lindelof is doing has been picked up to series order by HBO and should premiere in 2019. So I'm not too much to say there. I think we've talked about it a couple times, but I am excited for it. I'd love to watch it. And then my nerd year resolution was to read that comic this year, and I have not yet, but I plan to do that very soon by the end of the year. So I'm definitely looking forward to diving into that.
Yeah, I think the big difference between the ending, which I won't ruin or anything like that, obviously, is the ending in the movie is a lot different than the ending in the comic. And I think you probably already know that, being a big nerd that you are.
Yeah.
You've probably just heard that. So I would definitely prepare yourself for that. But I think, honestly, I think Watchmen is really underrated. I think it gets forgotten because I don't think it did very well as far as the box office is concerned. And Zack Snyder has obviously fallen on hard times as far as a filmmaker. Like, he's not held in such high regard. I mean, he came out swinging with Dawn of the Dead, and then you have 300. And I thought Watchmen kind of gotten forgotten because of that. And then he came out with a string of really shitty movies. And so I think people have forgotten how good that movie is.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't seen it since theaters, which is another movie I need to revisit, but I remember liking it quite a bit. So
yeah, it was actually, I think, my wife and I's like second or third date. When we first started dating, we went and saw Watchmen.
Nice.
Yeah, she didn't care for it.
I can imagine. I'm surprised she didn't just say, all right, we're done here.
Yeah, I'm really surprised. I mean, at the same time, I got a real big dick, so that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure, man. Anyways, that's all I have.
I made it super awkward.
I'm not going to get in a conversation with you about your dick on the podcast. So on that note, that's all I have for nerd news.
All right. So this is our main topic. It changes from episode to episode. We typically review some movie or TV show or whatever, and then we are going to be doing that in this particular episode. We're going to be reviewing the new Spike Lee Joint BlacKKKlansman. And so, like I said, it's directed by Spike Lee. He wrote it with several other writers, and it's actually based on a book by the title character. Well, I guess not the title character, but the main character, Ron Stallworth, who is, like I said, the focus of the film. It's based on the true story of this guy who is played by John David Washington in the movie, who, with the help of a white officer, Adam Driver, infiltrates the KKK. And so I don't know about you, Tyler, but Spike Lee is a filmmaker who, I mean, he definitely has his own style. Like, he has the Spike Lee tropes of like people talking to the camera. You don't get much of that in this movie. You do kind of get a scene where Alec Baldwin is talking to the camera, but he's making his own like film thing, so he's talking to the camera on purpose. Is not part of the actual movie, but you do have some cool tracking shots, and you have some interesting shots that I'm actually going to talk about in this movie that I thought, I don't remember seeing it in other Spike Lee movies, but I also don't watch that many Spike Lee movies, so it might be another thing that he does a lot in his movies, but he definitely has that unique style to him. My problem with him as a director, and it's not really a problem, it's just my personal preference. I don't even want to say that I don't like him as a storyteller, because I don't think that he's a bad storyteller. I just don't like the stories he chooses to tell, and that's just my personal preference, because like I've said before, I'm a white guy, literally and figuratively, and his stories generally focus on African American culture, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that by any means. But at a certain point, I feel like I need to at least relate to the story at some point, and it's hard for me to relate to some of his movies, and I think that's kind of the reason I don't like a lot of his movies, or I don't watch a lot of his movies. Like, I've seen a good chunk of his movies. One of my favorites is Inside Man, which is not like that at all. Like, it's not his typical movie. So I think that he's a very talented filmmaker. I just don't enjoy some of the stories he chooses to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you for the most part. I was talking to a buddy at work last week and mentioned wanting to see this movie, and he said, yeah, I really want to see it too. I'm just not a huge Spike Lee fan. And I said, yeah, me either. And that later that night, I got on IMDb and I went through Spike Lee's filmography, and I was like, wow, I think the only movie of his that I've seen is Inside Man. So it's not really fair for me to say I'm not a Spike Lee fan, because I haven't seen enough of his work. I mean, I really like Inside Man, so by that math, I am a Spike Lee fan. So I didn't really know too much what to expect here, but I was excited to see it. I thought that the trailer for this movie looked amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's definitely a very interesting story. I will say, before we jump into the actual review, I had something interesting happen in the movie theater when I went and saw this. So I was sitting in the very back row. I prefer to sit in the back row. And the guy, like, there was another gentleman sitting, and I'm using the word gentleman very loosely. He was sitting like on the other side of the row for me. And about 15, 20 minutes into this movie, there is, and I'm going to say it's a Black Panther meeting, but that's not, it's a little bit more in depth than that. But just for the sake of this story, that's what I'm going to say. There's like this big Black Panther meeting in this movie, and the keynote speaker, so to speak, is giving this really powerful speech, and it's a very important part of this movie. It's a very powerful moment in the movie, especially at the very beginning of the movie, and this guy just gets up and walks off, and I was like, that's kind of a weird moment to go to the bathroom. Like, it's a very powerful part of the movie, especially in the beginning, but the guy never came back. It was bothering me while I was driving home, because I was like, what did he expect this movie to be exactly? And I started to crack myself up, and this is such a stupid story, but I started cracking myself up because I kept thinking of the Dave Chappelle bit where he's the blind guy in the KKK and doesn't know that he's African American, and I kept cracking myself up that maybe this guy thought that was like this was going to be like a feature film version of that bit, and I just kept cracking myself up on the ride home, because I was like, what did this guy think this movie was going to be?
I was surprised that I didn't have any of that in my theater, and I'm wondering how often that's happened. But you're exactly right. Like, what did you think this was going to be? And I felt almost a little awkward being in this movie, because everyone in my theater was Caucasian. obviously, the struggles that this movie shows for African Americans, and what we're going to get into around like how this depicts racism is a pretty heavy subject. And I hope that nobody else in that movie theater, I hope nobody in that movie theater was racist. But I got the guy in front of me looked like a good old boy, and not that a good old boy can't be tolerant, but I definitely got some racist vibes from him. So it was just a whole thing. And
I'm not saying that this is what that guy was. Like, I don't want to paint that picture, but that was the impression that I got.
I'll say it for you. He was racist for sure.
Like, why even go to a Spike Lee movie though? Like, why even? I don't know what in the trailer would lead you to believe that it was anything but what we got. And honestly, we've talked about this before. We live in Indiana, and I will share a story that I never thought I was going to ever tell. But literally, I went to Corden High School, and first of all, they would literally have a day every year in high school where some of the good old boys would fly their Confederate flags, like on the back of their trucks. Like, that was a thing that they planned once a year, and it was a big deal. And I just kind of rolled my eyes. It's funny for multiple reasons, mostly because Indiana wasn't part of the Confederacy. So there's that. But also, the first day that I moved to Corydon, it was like the first weekend, there was literally a Klan rally, like a parade, a Klan parade, which I didn't even know they had parades. But in Corydon, like, it was a big deal. And I was like, that was the first time I'd ever even like legitimately seen the Klan like out and about. And I was just like, what the fuck did I get myself into? Because I grew up in like New England and upstate New York, and like I heard about the Klan, but I didn't actually physically see it with my own eyes until I moved to Indiana. So it's definitely still a part of the culture here. Hopefully it's dying out, obviously, but I kept thinking about that as I watched this movie, because it's not something, it's like one of those things where I had forgot that it even happened because I just repressed it.
Yeah, man, that's fucked up. So, I mean, I've never had any, like, I grew up in Southern Indiana as well, and I never had any interaction with or saw like a Klan rally or anything. But I mean, I also went to a high school that was very rural, or a lot of people that lived in a rural area went to this high school, and there was a lot of racism at my high school, which was always super uncomfortable. So, and just terrible. But anyways, I digress.
Yeah, so let's get back to BlacKKlansman. We start off these reviews after we kind of give our little intro here, just kind of giving a general overview of what we felt about whatever we're reviewing. So how'd you feel about BlacKKlansman?
I don't have a ton for broad strokes, but spoiler alert, I thought this movie was excellent. It does have its flaws that I'll get into throughout the review, but I thought that this was a super interesting story, and the movie definitely captivated me from start to finish. So, like I said, it's not perfect by any means, but overall, really great.
Yeah, I kind of feel very similar. I will say that it was very uncomfortable for me to watch this movie. And I think that obviously that's what he's going for. It should be uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable for me to watch people. I know they're actors, but they do a very, very good job. I don't think I've ever seen Topher Grace do a better job than he did, which is so weird because he's playing like one of the most horrible human beings to ever walk the earth. So it's kind of weird to say that you're really good at playing this evil, evil person. But like, it's so hard for me to sit there and watch so much hate. Like, it was so uncomfortable. And they start off the movie with the Alec Baldwin thing, and he's not in the movie the rest of the movie, and it's such a tone. And I mean, it's great. It's great filmmaking. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable. It's supposed to elicit that reaction from you. Like, if you feel good during that scene, then you need to get the fuck, like, you need some help, like, because you're a terrible person. Like, so I just like started like squirming in my seat, and I was like, this is not going to be great. This is going to be 12 Years a Slave all over again. Like, I felt so uncomfortable, and I don't think I've seen a movie that spewed so much hate since that movie, and it made me super uncomfortable. But again, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable. That's what you expect going into this movie, and I think that he did a phenomenal job. It's probably, I mean, like I said, I haven't seen a ton of Spike Lee movies, but I still think Inside Man's probably my favorite of his movies. I may never watch this movie again just because it made me so uncomfortable, but it's brilliantly made. I did have a few story problems with it, but for the most part, I feel weird saying that I enjoyed this movie because it did make me very uncomfortable, but I think it's such a well put together movie and well acted movie.
Yeah, man, you bring up a really good point with that too. Like it is exhausting. Like it is a marathon of a movie because it is just one terrible thing after another. But yeah, it's important.
So let's just dive right into the story. And for me, this is the most problems I had with the movie. There's not a ton of problems. I thought that it was a really interesting story. I just didn't think that Ron Stallworth was the more interesting character of the two guys. Well, I guess there's three guys. And I was more interested in Adam Driver's character than anything else. And I guess Spike Lee might argue that that's because I'm a white guy. So I related to the white guy in the group. So that, I guess that makes sense. But I don't know if I necessarily thought that Ron Stallworth was that interesting of a character. And I will say that the whole idea of them, like, basically coming together and playing half of the character, and then like you put them together and then they're the whole caricature that they're creating of Ron Stallworth. I thought that was really interesting, and it led to some really interesting and funny moments within the movie, as funny as this movie could be. But I think the ultimate mission and the thing that they stop, I know it was dangerous, but I never really felt the danger in this movie.
Okay. I could kind of see that, like the peak of the movie, I guess you'd say, or the climax of the movie wasn't any. Yeah, I get what you're saying for sure. For me, I would say the story is amazing. I mean, it's based on a true story, and they obviously take liberties with it. But the idea of this undercover operation in the Ku Klux Klan to me was very interesting, especially since it was led by an African American person. So, like the movie says at the beginning, actually it says it's based on some real for real shit, and what I appreciate is that this movie is dealing with some really heavy stuff and just how terrible racism has been and continues to be, but even with dealing with that heavy stuff, like it still manages to be sharp and funny in places, which I appreciated. I don't want to say that this movie doesn't beat you over the head with its message, because it kind of does. But
yeah,
it's not
for sure.
it's not a bad thing to me, and it does so in a very tactful way. There are a lot of powerful films that have been made over the last few decades, and even some that are based around this topic and around racism. But somehow this movie manages to transcend its message and not only get the point across, but tell an interesting story where you genuinely root for the main characters. Like, so whether that's Adam Driver or whether that's Ron Stallworth, I forget the actor's name, but Denzel Washington's son, all of that's really important, and it gets your buy-in. So obviously this movie also arrives at a time where the subject matter is extremely relevant, and the movie acknowledges that before the credits roll with actual news footage from the last couple of years that are emotionally stirring. And I mean, I've said it time and time again, but if a movie is able to get me emotionally invested, then it's won me over. And this movie definitely did that by the end of it. The only negative things that I have to say about this movie are just around some story choices. I feel like some of the side storylines and the narrative, some of the side storylines were unnecessary, and then the narrative kind of lingers on some stuff for too long as well. So the examples I have is that I really didn't care about Ron and Patrice's relationship. So I thought that there was just too much time put into that. I know it served a purpose, especially by the end of the movie, but you know, that really stretched out this 2-hour running time and made it feel longer than it actually was. And same thing with other little bits littered here and there. Like, for example, you brought up before we started going about there's like a 10 to 15 minute speech given by the character Kwame Ture early in the movie. And while like the message is very impactful and it's very strong and it's a very strong scene, but it doesn't really do much to service the plot, in my opinion. And it pulls out that running time as well. So you definitely feel that 2 hours and 8 minutes. And maybe it's because, like you were saying, it's a marathon of a movie. But those things were some problems I had. They don't ruin the movie for me by any means, but I do think that it could have been something where the story was a little bit more straightforward without those plot points.
I will disagree a little bit. I think that scene, that speech does play a part because well, I mean, if you don't care about their relationship, I guess I could see why you don't care about that scene because that's pivotal in their relationship. And I think that relationship is important later in the movie because even though I didn't buy into the danger, and I think some people might argue that that's white privilege because I've never experienced racism. So, I mean, other than it's never been directed towards me. I've seen other people be racist before, but it's never been directed towards me. So I guess I just don't have that fear in me. So I guess if you're African American, obviously you've unfortunately had racism spewed at you. So this movie is going to have a huger impact on you than it would me. And I think that might play a part in it. But I think that they build that relationship up so you do feel that danger. And I guess in a way, I didn't really buy the relationship either because I didn't really buy the danger. And that's really kind of the only reason they have that relationship there. The thing, and you brought up the side plots, and I didn't bring this up. I didn't really care for his like rivalry between him and the other cop, the white cop with the mustache. I don't know if you ever get his name. I'm sure you do, but I just didn't care about that part of the movie. Like that could have easily been cut out and you wouldn't need it because they have like this weird moment at the end where they get him and they all like cheer in this bar. And I'm just like, this feels like a cheesy like 80s movie, like made for TV movie. Like that's what it felt like. It didn't feel like it needed to be in this movie.
Yeah. Okay. I don't agree with that one. But I see where you're coming from. So kind of sit in the same vein of what I was saying. Just we differ on the side plots for sure.
For sure. So performances wise, I feel like everyone was pretty good. Like I said, Topher Grace was amazing as David Duke, which again is weird to say that you're amazing at being a fucking just garbage person.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Like there wasn't a bad performance in the movie. I thought that. So John David Washington, that's the guy whose name escaped me earlier. He's Denzel Washington's son, and he is on the TV show Ballers, which I talked about a few times. And he plays like this arrogant football player who's a womanizer, and he's fine, but he's not great. So for this to be like the big first movie I've seen him in, like I thought that he did an amazing job. I also thought that Laura Harrier did a great job. I didn't even recognize her as being Liz from Spider-Man Homecoming until I was on this movie's IMDb page afterwards. So obviously to go from that movie to this movie, like she plays a very powerful character. So I thought that was great and she did a great job. You said Topher Grace, he's amazing. And then Adam Driver, like I don't know that the guy has a huge range, but with what he does, he's able to definitely get a message across and deliver a great performance. So it was, I don't know why, but it was tough watching him spew hate, even though he was undercover, because I do like him as an actor. And I have to imagine that's tough for any actor to do those things. But I thought that he did a great job.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because I do want to mention, I read an article the other day that Topher Grace literally had to like take time off after he did this movie because it took a toll on him so much to do what you just said, is to like to spew that hate and to like embody somebody that's just, like I said, a garbage person. And that might be a compliment to David Duke to just call him a garbage person. But yeah, I will say that obviously that takes a toll on you. And I do think that Adam Driver isn't the best actor for sure. And I've had my problems with him in past movies, but I definitely think that he did a phenomenal job in this movie to have that, to know underneath what he must be going through, just to like want to just fucking strangle these people. Cause that's kind of how I felt like listening to them talk. I'm just like, I want to fucking just punch you in your stupid fucking face. Like anytime that they said anything, especially Felix was the worst, which I didn't write this guy's name down, but he was phenomenal. The guy that played Felix, but just to sit there and listen to them and not want to punch them in the face. I think that he portrayed that really well. You could definitely see the conflict in him. And I think, and I want to talk about Spike Lee and kind of his directing, since we don't really have another segment because we usually talk about like action or comedy, and none of those really fit in this one. I kind of want to talk about how you felt about Spike Lee's directing. And I think that he did a really good job of, because there's certain moments, especially with Adam Driver, where they'll say something and then he'll cut to Adam Driver and he kind of just gives him like a split second before he'll actually respond. He kind of sits in that moment and you're like, oh no, he's going to break. And then he says something like super racist and you're like, oh, thank God. Like, I've never been so relieved to hear someone say something racist because you feel for Adam Driver's character and you don't want him to get caught. And then when he says like the perfect thing to say in this situation, you're like, oh, thank God. Like he's going to be all right. And I like the fact that Spike Lee just sits in those awkward moments in between what some awful thing that's said to Adam Driver and then his reaction to it. I think that he did a really good job with that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that Spike Lee definitely did a great job with this movie. Like, I want to speak to like the things that he's known for, but having only seen Inside Man, like I can't really do that. But I thought that the directing on this movie was fantastic. Like, I thought that the Alec Baldwin stuff at the beginning was a little out of place at first, but then
for sure,
in retrospect, like kind of looking back on the movie as a whole, I think it makes a little bit more sense. And yeah, I mean, he got some really great performances out of his actors, so that's definitely a credit to him.
The one thing that I wanted to point out, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that has talked about this, it was a little jarring for me. And I've seen more Spike Lee movies than you have, but I don't remember it being a staple of his directing. But there were a couple of moments where he would show you the same thing out of different angles, and that was a little bit distracting. I've said this before. I really like to immerse myself in movies. Like, I want to forget that I'm watching a movie, and there was moments where I remembered I was watching a movie. Of course, in the back of my mind, I always know I'm watching a movie, but I like to immerse myself. And I kind of talked about this with Mile 22, like when he would snap that stupid fucking rubber band, it would literally snap me back into, oh yeah, I'm watching this stupid fucking Marky Mark movie. And I almost kind of felt like that in a different aspect. Obviously, this is such a far and away better movie than stupid Mile 22, but it just kept reminding me, oh yeah, I'm watching a Spike Lee movie.
Yeah, I didn't really catch that as much. I don't know why, but I could agree.
And then there was another moment, it's probably a lot more noticeable. There's another moment during that speech that we keep referring to where they like had this like black screen and they would just have people's faces and you would hear the guy's speech over. And I just thought it was cool. Like it showed you as like a different, I don't think like a less accomplished director would have the balls to do something weird like that. And so I thought it was interesting, but after like the second time I saw it, I was like, okay, let's stop doing that. Like, I don't like that. So stop doing it.
I forgot about that. I didn't like that either.
Yeah. So other than that, I thought it was phenomenal. Like, I didn't see as much of the tropes that you usually see in Spike Lee movies. Like, I didn't see the tracking shots that you usually see in his movies, which I actually really like. That kind of stuff. Like, I'm kind of definitely a film nerd, and so I was kind of looking for that and I didn't see it. So I don't want to say that I was disappointed, but it was kind of cool not to see those tropey things that you expect to see in a Spike Lee movie. But yeah, overall I was really impressed with it.
Yeah, for sure, man.
All right, so star rating out of 5 stars, what'd you think of BlacKKKlansman?
4 stars.
Okay, so I'm going to give it 3.5, and I think that boils down to, like I said, I just didn't buy that monumental moment, like the danger in the third act. I just didn't feel it as much. So I think I kind of have to give it 3.5, just because I didn't, like I said, didn't feel that. It's definitely on my best of 2018 list so far. I really doubt it makes the cut, though.
Yeah, I don't know that it'll end up on my top 10 or not, but I definitely stand by 4 stars. I thought it was a powerful movie, and especially towards the end, like definitely emotionally wrapped me into it. So for sure.
All right, so the last segment before we sign off for this episode, we always do like a nerd favorite. And this episode is going to be a little bit different. It's my turn to pick. We go back and forth each episode picking the topic, and it's my week to pick the topic. And instead of doing our favorite blank or whatever, I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to phrase this, but I've been watching this show, and I don't like the term guilty pleasure because I'm not really embarrassed about anything that I watch. I've gotten to that point in my life where I'm not going to apologize for things that I like, but I am an animal lover. I have 2 dogs, and I love my dogs very much. I'm a big dog lover, but just animals in general. And I really like animal shows like that. I guess if you would call it a guilty pleasure, then that's what it is. But there's a series on Netflix called 72 Dangerous Animals, and they always pick like a region. And so I've watched 72 Dangerous Animals of Latin America, and they just dropped 72 Dangerous Animals of Asia. And it's kind of a stupid show, honestly. Like they basically, each episode they have like 4 or 5 animals, and they kind of talk about how dangerous each one of them is, and they kind of rank them, and then at the end of the show they're going to come up with 11, and then they're going to basically crown the most dangerous animal of Asia. And it's pretty dumb. Like, the concept is dumb, but I just like that's just an excuse for them to talk about each one of these animals, and that's kind of what I want to know. Like, I just love animals, and I love to know about animals. So I am definitely a fan of those type of shows. Like, I have Blue Planet on Blu-ray. I have Life on Blu-ray. So I really enjoy those types of shows. And I was just kind of interested, what is your, I guess, quote unquote, guilty pleasure?
So there's a lot of like episodic TV shows that my wife and I will watch throughout the week, just like as we're eating dinner or whatever, just winding down. So there's a few that I could bring up here because it's not stuff that like I would talk to you about, or not, and they're not things that I would bring up on the podcast, but I watch them pretty regularly. Like, the most obvious one that jumps out to me is House Hunters. So
okay.
I think I've seen this meme before, but I used to give my dad so much shit about watching HGTV whenever I was growing up because it was so boring to me. But now that I'm a boring adult and I have a house and have literally house hunted, that show is kind of a guilty pleasure in a way because there's not much weight to it, but it's still, and I can, in like any reality show, you can tell that certain things with it are staged. Like, chances are like these couples did not just look at 3 houses and then have to choose between 3 of them. So that's not really how it works, but it's still an interesting show to watch. And then also a couple months ago, my wife and I watched Queer Eye, which I know your wife
fucking
watches.
love that show.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it.
Yeah, that show was amazing. The first 2 seasons of it were great. Like, it's funny, and then there's bits of it where it gets emotional, and it was just a really fun show to watch, and there was more weight to it than I thought there would be. And I honestly, like, I think that each one of those guys are all like cool characters, and they seem like genuinely good people. So I think that's why that show is enjoyable. So I know they're filming season 3 right now, so I'll be looking forward to that, and then I'm sure my wife and I will be watching that when it comes back out on Netflix.
Yeah, that's a good one. I will say, like, the house hunting stuff, like, I used to be obsessed with that, and I kind of got back into it after we had bought our house. So we literally we looked at about 10, 15 houses before we bought the house that we currently live in, and so there is kind of fun to watch those shows, knowing the information and seeing the houses on your own, like going house hunting on your own. It definitely brings a new aspect to watching those shows. But I've heard, like, any reality show is like this, but like I've read stuff like they've already bought the house, and then they just go back retroactively and look at the houses and pretend like they're gonna, they already own this other house. Like, the house that they picked, they already bought. Because, as you know, Tyler, like, it's not something that you can just do right away. And it's not like you're doing it in a vacuum either. Like, you're not the only one that gets to pick this house. So it's interesting the way that they film those shows. And I thought you were gonna bring up the meme, like, they're always like, oh, I'm a part-time school teacher, and I'm a artist that does weird art, and we have a budget of 1.5 million. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, these jobs that are just like, don't make that much money, and they have this ridiculous budget.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it quickly made me realize that I could not afford to live outside the Midwest. Like, when they're looking at like shitty houses in Portland, Oregon that are double the price of my house, it's not feasible. So the cost of living throughout the United States is crazy as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like my house, I've already like thought about it. Like my house that we bought pretty cheaply. I mean, we didn't want to go overboard because this is the first house that we ever bought. We tried to be smart about it, and our house would probably be like 400,000. In a bigger city because we have a backyard, and like I know in Vegas, like where my parents or my parent lives, and my family lives, they barely have. They have like a quarter of my backyard, and their house is like at least double what mine is.
Yeah, man, it's crazy for sure.
All right. Yeah. So that was a weird little tangent that we went on about house hunters and like buying houses. So we're actually going to start a second podcast, the real estate nerds that you're looking for. But that is it for episode 203 of the Nerds You're Looking For. Of course, we'd really appreciate if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any podcatcher you use. We really appreciate that because there's a lot of like nerd culture, comic book, TV and film podcasts out there, and the more reviews that we get, it separates us from the pack. And so we definitely appreciate that. Check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Like I said earlier, it's kind of the hub for everything, including our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Google+. And then you can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking@gmail.com. Patrick Kuhn.
Tyler Hunt.
We are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.